Learning as chutz for Shlemo, Pilan Chaya Baserach. We're on the bottom of Hey Amid Beis. I know it's Tana Rabbanan. I can't find it.
Up to Tanya.
Tanya. 3 lines from the bottom. Tanya. Shimon Aimer. Matam Ulemu Par Sheni Ben Bakar Tikach Lechatas. What does the pasuk mean when it says the Lachu Par Ben Bakar Mechasai Salas Below Shenu Par Sheni Ben Bakar Tikach Lechatas? This is talking about when after the Chait, the Levium took over, the Kehanim took over for the Bechayrim, that they're going to be doing the Avodah in the Beis HaMikdash, and they brought a carbon to compensate or to get a kapara for the Chait that required this switchover, right? Because the Kehanim participated in the Chayda, I'm sorry, not the Kehanim, the Bechayrim participated in the Chayda Egel. The Kehanim did not, so they became the one who did the Avodah. They brought this carbon. It says, "Par sheni ben bakar tikach lechatz." You should bring a second bakar lechatz. What is it saying? Im lamachem shnayim. If it's to tell you that they brought 2 parim, like farnema va'asas achad chatas v'achad ayla l'Hashem. It says in the rest of the pasuk, "V'alavim yismuch v'asideim al reisha parim v'asas achad chatas v'achad ayla l'Hashem l'chaper al alavim." So it already says that you brought one as a chatas and one as an ayla. So you could do math. One for chatz and one ayla equals 2. So what does it have to tell you? What does the pasuk have to tell you? Par sheni ben bakar. Ella yachal heinecheles chatas. So the Mefarshim changes instead of la leviim, because leviim are not the ones. The leviim were the ones with. I'm sorry, I said kehanim. I meant leviim. Leviim were the ones that were stepping into the place, but it doesn't mean the Levium eat the chatas. The chatas is eaten by kehanim. So it either says nechelas chatas halavim, or else they take out the word levium altogether. But essentially, what it means to say is it's going to be eaten as a chatas. There are different types of chatoyas. The chatoyas that are brought bifnim, that the zrikas dam is lefnim, are not eaten by the kehanim. Those are brought and burnt in their totality outside of Yerushalayim. The chatas that are brought outside in the Mizbeach B'chutz, those are eaten by the Kehanim. So this is what this is telling. I might think that this par lechatos is going to be eaten by the Kehanim, just like the other chatoyas that are brought outside. Since we say that the second par is going to be an oila, and oila is certainly not eaten under any circumstances, this chatas is going to fit into the category of those chatoyas that are not eaten by kehanim, but rather are burnt in their totality.
I'm sorry, where are we up to?
We are on the bottom of Hey Amid Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. 3. We're actually just turning the page. We just started on the top line of Vav and Aleph. So we just learned from a pasuk that there's a certain chatas that is brought, par chatas that was brought by the Levium when they took over from the Bechayrim, that is not eaten by the Kehanim. It's the kind of, we dash from a pasuk, that it's rather burnt in total. Kiyotzei, similarly, Amar Rabbi Yosi, Habayim mehashvi hagoyla. This is a pasuk in Ezra. The pasuk says, Habayim mehashvi bnei hagoyla. Those returnees who came back, they had left during the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash, and then they came back 70 years later, or sometime after that, when the second Beis HaMikdash was being built. So these are the returnees. They brought oilos, parim, shnayim, aser, 12 cows, al kol Yisrael, for all Klal Yisrael, elim, tishim, 90 rams, Tishim Veshisha, the Elim, the rams were 96, Kvasim Shivim Veshiva, 77 Kvasim, Zipirei Chatas Shnei Maser, and 12 birds for a Chatas. Hakoil Oil Hashem. All of them were Oil Hashem. So Dr. Gemara on this. Hakol Oil, That's the end of the pasuk. Hakol oilos al kadaytach. Could you say that they're all oilos? Efshe chatas oila. We started from the beginning. We said parim shnei masa al kol yisrael elim tisha. It says sipur chatas shnei masa. It says that they were chatas. So how can you say they're oila? It's either oila or chatas. It's not the same thing. Ela kol ka'oila. Rather, what it means to say is all these things were brought like an oila. Ma oila loy necheles, ab chatas necheles. So similar to the first drasha that we said, that we have a drasha to tell you that the karbanos brought by the Levium were going to be like an oila and that they're not eaten. We were dashing over here when it says oila, it also is telling you that these chatas are the kind of chatas that are like an oila and that they're not eaten. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Aimer. Yehuda says that these chatas that were brought by the Yidden who returned with Ezra from Bavel to return to Eretz Yisrael by the Binyan base by Yesheni, they were bringing this carbon, this chatas, because of the Avodah Zarah, because they had committed Avodah Zarah previously in the time of Chizkiah. Like what the Gemara says, these chatas were brought because of Avodah Zarah.
It was when they were still doing the first.
In the first Beis Hamikdash. So Tzidkiyahu was a tzaddik, and he tried to stop the Yidden from being over Avodah Zarah, but nevertheless they were over. So
70 years later.
Yes.
Totally different generation.
Oh, the Gemara is going to talk about this. Gemara is going to bring a raya that these were the same people who were still alive. Many of them were still alive. Even most of them were still alive.
Most of them still alive.
Or most of the people who were there in Eretz, who came to Eretz Yisrael, were people who had been there who had been there at the time. Now, I don't know if that most of the people were alive, but most of the people now who are bringing the carbon, they were mostly from the Shavuyim, from people who had lived, not people who had been born in the interim. Umar will bring a raya from a pasuk. Yeah. So tomorrow, Bishlam Rabbi Yehuda. So now we're going. This is all. We went on a sidetrack, but now we're getting back to our Mishnah, which, if you remember, we had the Machlekes. We had Rameir, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rav Shimon. Rameir's general thesis was that you bring, when there's a par helam davar shel tzibur, the carbon is brought by the Bezdin, the Sanhedrin. Rabbi Yehuda had said that, first of all, the carbon is brought by each individual shevet brings a carbon, and even if Roiv of the Tziburim, Roiv of the Shvatim were over, the other Shvatim have to bring Alts Guerrero. We drag in even the ones that were Roiv of them were not over, they also bring. And Rav Shimon had said that they both bring. You bring a carbon, Rav Shimon doesn't hold of Guerrero, but he does hold that each individual shevet brings. But he says, in additional to each shevet, as a tzibur bringing a carbon, the original Bezdin, the Sanhedrin also brings a carbon. So he had said, if you remember in the Mishnah, you bring 13, there are 13 parhalam davas brought, one for each shevet in the case where each of the shvatim was over, as well as the Bezdin. So we said in this pasuk that there were 12 chatayis that were brought because they are the Aveir of Avodah Zarah. Going to Chatu Shnei Masur Shvatim, where all 12 Shvatim did a chait, the Maisu Shnei Masur Seirim. So therefore they bring 12 Seirim. This is talking about Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah it's a little different. It's not a Par Helam Dav, but rather it's Seirim. Inami the Chatu Shiva Shvatim, or else seven of the Shvatim were over, B'Shaira Einach Begrera, and the rest of them also bring because they get dragged along. So we have this pasuk makes sense according to Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Shimon nami mishkachasla. You could also justify it according to Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon doesn't hold of Greira, but he does hold that each shevet brings for their own. Could go into chadu acharaser shvatim. According to Reb Shimon, you're gonna have to say we're 11 of the shvatim were over, and not the 12th. The maisu acharaser seirim. They bring 11 seirim v'idach the bezdin, and the last one according to Reb Shimon that Rosh Shimon holds that the Bezdin also brings a carbon. So the Sanhedrin will also bring the 12th carbon. So when it says 12 chatoyis, it's only what happened. Obviously, what happened in the pasuk is that there was one shevet that wasn't over, and therefore you have 12, which is 11 shvatim plus Bezdin. El Rameir, the Amma Bezdin maybe Loy Tzibur. According to Rameh, who says that Bezdin is the one who brings it, not the different shvatim. Shnei Masar Heichi Mishkachas. How do you have 12 chatayis? And but the Gemara kind of chatu v'hadu ad treisa zimni. We're talking about where the Yidden did a chait of Avodah Zarah, and then they repented, and then they did it again, and this happened 12 times. So they had to bring 12 chatayis consecutively, one after the other. Now the Gemara asks what it bothered Rafal. How could we be bringing a chatas when Ezra brought back the returnees from Bavel? They had long ago died. This pasuk is talking about this pasuk of Habayim Hashevi Agayl. It's talking about when the Yidden came back to the second Beis Hamikdash after the whole Galus, which was 70 years, and they brought chatas. They brought a chatas, whichever chatas it is, or the Seirei Avodah Zarah. They brought it for the sins that had occurred like almost 8 decades ago, or whatever it was. So those people are not alive, and there's what you're going to find throughout Kachim is the halacha of chatas shemesu bala. There are actually 5 different kinds, which the Gemara is going to get up to on Amid Beis. There are 5 reasons why a person wouldn't bring a chatas, or that a chatas is unable to be brought, and there's a gzeres hakasav, or not really gzeres hakasav, a halacha l'moshe misinai, that under those circumstances, the chatas that was set aside has to be killed. It's not yirat sheyistav, you don't have the opportunity to be paided, but rather it has to die. And so one of them is, we'll try to see how many I can remember. I know that the way of remembering it is the word timna. So one is chatas shemesu balel. If the bailam died, so then you can't someone else can't bring a chatas on behalf of someone who's dead. It's too late. He missed his chance. As we know, you can only do tshuva when you're alive. So we have to kill the chatas. Another one is a chatas, a tmuras chatas. If someone exchanges chatas for another one, so that the Torah says so we say about that also, that chatas is no longer able to be brought and it has to be killed. Another one is sheniskaper balel, that the bailam already, they lost it and they brought another chatas in its place, and now they found the original one. That one also has to die. And then a vlad chatas, if a chatas gave birth, so you have to, the vlad has to be killed. And there's one more I forgot. We'll see later. But in any case, all these things, that there's a halacha l'moshe Sinai, that unlike other kachim that you can be paided, these have to be killed. So this l'chayra should fall into that classification. If the bailam died, the rule is it's a chatas. The chatas has to be killed. How are you bringing another chatas? And certainly, if you have to kill a chatas that was already set aside, you can't bring a new chatas for someone who's dead. If we say that someone who died, you can't bring the chatas that he himself had set aside. How are we bringing a chatas for people who are long passed away? That din that we said, that the owners who died, their chatas gets killed, that's only a carbon yachid. Not a carbon tzibur. There's no such concept that a tzibur was mace. So this is a soyer of avodah zarah, but this is not the soyer of a tzibur. This is not the soyer of an individual. This is the soyer of the tzibur, right? Paralam davashal tzibur, and the soyer and the version of that you bring by avodah zarah are both karbanos tzibur. The tzibur has its own independent life, regardless of its constituent individuals. Even if they died, the tzibur is still there. Where does Rav Papa get this? That at tzibur there's no din of chatas that we say chata shemesu ba'aleh on a tzibur. The Torah says legabi doing tshuva. Tachas avisecha yubanecha shiseme l'sar mechala aretz. The children will take the place of the parents. If you're going to learn from that pasuk, that would tell you even by yachad that chata shemesu ba'aleh, the children should bring it in their place. But we know that that's not the case. So it can't be a broad pasuk to tell you that children can always bring a chatas in the place of their fathers. The Papa is medayik from the soil that's brought in Rosh Chodesh, which is brought because of tumas that people were over on different tumas during the month. We say we bring the soil of Rosh Chodesh, which is a form of a chatas tzibur, and we say we bring it from the trumas halishka. You take it from the monies that were taken from the lishka at the beginning of the month, or they would do it before each Yom Tov, and so you would take from that money that had been taken from the lishka. So how could it be that you take this money if it's coming from the lishka? Some Yidden unfortunately, people are always dying as time goes on. So how could you use from money from a Greiset Tzibur, but some of those people died, and then that should give some of the people died, and we know the rule is that if you have people that died, it's chata shemesu ba'aleh and slamisa. So how could you bring for those that are left over from those Yidden who didn't die during the interim between the time the money was collected and the time that on Rosh Chodesh when you bring the carbon? But some of the people for whom this is chatas is affecting a kapara have died, and then it's a chatas shemesu ba'aleh. So it should make it that it has to be killed because that's the rule of chatas shemesu ba'aleh. El shamina chatas shemesu ba'aleh b'tzibur karva. What is this? So that it must be because this is a tzibur, and since it's a tzibur, we don't care. It's not doesn't affect the validity of the carbon. There's no din of chata shemesu ba'aleh when it's talking about a tzibur. Midami. How could you compare? How could you say we'll learn from the Sar Rosh Chodesh? Sar Rosh Chodesh demolay ma'aseh mitzibur. It says you're speculating that it's likely that someone died, but we don't know that. And we know we can't make something pakal connected a chazaka. Chazaka is that everyone was alive. To assume we can say statistically someone for sure died, but we don't know for sure that someone died. It could be that this month no one died. So therefore, maybe that's the reason over there why we say you could bring the chatas. Over here, when you're talking about 70, 80 years, certainly we know many people died who were Oved Avodah Zarah. At the time of their Papa Mehacha. So we have to come from a different source. T'chsev, Kaper la'amcha Yisrael asher padisa Hashem. This is in the parsha of Eglah Arufa. If someone was found, if a corpse was found in an uninhabited area, and we don't know which town he came from, you have to bring Eglah Arufa and cut off its head. And then they say, this nusach kapel amchi Yisrael asher padisa Hashem. The skenim of the nearest town say the nusach that should be mechaper to your nation Yisrael that Hashem was paida. And what does that mean? Ru'uya kaparazu to kapal yoytze Mitzrayim. Miklichsev asher padisa. When it says asher padisa that the Bar Shalom redeemed, that's a reference to the dar of the yoytze Mitzrayim. Yoytze Mitzrayim. This is brought by every Eglah Arufa, you say this. Even if it's hundreds of years later, it's roy to be a kapara even for the Yotzei Mitzrayim. So you see that you could have a kapara even on people who are dead because the Yotzei Mitzrayim was obviously part of the tzibur of Klal Yisrael. So you see a tzibur can get a kapara even after they're dead. It's only on an individual that we say kapar that chatas that the chatas of someone who died has to be killed. So Gemara, Midami, how could you compare it? Hasam kulu isinun migude mechaper achai mechaper nami amesim. The people who are bringing it now, they certainly have they're alive, right? It's talking about the Bezdin or the Skanim of the city, and they're bringing it. They're alive, so they are able to bring it. And we're saying since they get a kapara, we schlep along a kapara also for the Yotzei Mitzrayim, but it's not being brought for them. The people who it's being brought for now are Chaim. So therefore, since it makes the kapara for them, the pasuk says we also get a kapara for previous days. But over here are the people for whom this carbon is being brought. This is being brought for the averos that they did back then. So those people are not alive. But the more Einachanam, you know they were alive. The Chsiv, we bring from a pasuk a raya that when these chatayas were brought by Ezra, they were for the Yidden who had gone into Galus and or they had been over Avodah Zarah and then gone into Galus, and now they're returning. Why does it say? So the whole pasuk, we have to see the whole pasuk. This is talking about when Ezra brought these karbanos. He said many of the Kainim and Leviim and the Rashi Avos that saw the first bias biyasadai when it was standing. Bias beineim, when they saw this new bias, they would cry because they compared it to the original bias that reminded them of the opinion of the new bias of the original bias that they had lost. And then there were also many who were misameach with the building of the second bias because though they didn't remember, so they looked at it as a pure good thing. So you see that there were many people who were still around who were crying at the binyan of the Bayis Sheni. So they were the ones who were still alive from the original Avera. Maybe they were a miyat. Maybe most of the people were dead, and therefore you don't have you have to have roiv of the tzibur was over. So you don't have roiv of the tzibur. So how could you bring the carbon parhal and davash al tzibur or the soyer of Avodah Zarah? Zak the Gemara. Haksiv was the pasuk. Ve'ena makirim koil truas hasimcha lekol bechiyam. You couldn't hear the people who are being misameach at the binyan of the Beis Hamikdash of the Bayis Sheni because of the cries of those people who were crying. Ki amariyim trua gedoyla v'akol nishma ad l'merachai. Because they were the sounds of the mourning overwhelmed the sounds of the celebration. So you see that there were more people that were crying than those who were celebrating. Now, I understood this, that you had a roiv. We're bringing the carbon now that it would go based on what was a roiv back at that time. So I'm not sure why we're comparing the people who are still around from the original bias to the people who are part of this new bias.
They had to be roiv at the time.
At the original time, yeah. So let's just quickly see the Rashi on this. Maybe it's the miyat of the tzibur at the Bayis Sheni. It says it's the Bayis Sheni. Mit ein makirin koil simcha shma mino the ruba have ois in the boichem have ikhat shroi baleh kaimen mishamachi karva. Yeah, I'm not sure why this is the proper comparison to make. We're saying it's havichat shroi baleh kayamin. What does it have to do with how many people are alive now? What does it have to do with how many people? Whether it's roiv, the chatas originally is it roiv baleh? Okay. And for the Gemara, so that's the teretz. So we know that it was a roiv, and that's why it could be roiv. Practicing Gemara, this all seems inapplicable because the din of paral and davash al tzibur and the din of a soyer of Avodah Zarah is only for someone who's a shaygig, and we know that they were, unfortunately, they were nichshal in avodah zarah. It wasn't all that Bezdin said avodah zarah's mutter, and they followed it. So how could you bring a soyer of avodah zarah? This was a special din that was only at that time. It's not applicable to other times. It was einachanami, unusual form of the soyer of avodah zarah. And I could prove it to you. Not for that. Elam tishim v'shisha tishim v'shisha kvasim shiva v'shiva connected me. What are all these other karbanos? What were they brought for? They don't seem to have. These are all different, all part of the chatas. These are not. You don't normally bring elam at all. You don't bring kvasim, and how do you get 96 and 77? Where do these numbers come from? Eloi roh shahisa. Hachanami roh shahisa. The whole thing was a hirasha. Tanuraban.
Irrelevant whether it was right or not.
Yeah, you say right. So you're saying just like we now we can answer the whole thing. Once we're answering that, even though they're mezidim, it could also be that they were not arrived. We answer the whole thing with that it's all the hirasha. Yeah. Tanuraban. Meis echad minat tzibur. If one of the tzibur died, chayav, you still have to bring, right? This is a brisa. It says, if you back to the general din of a param davashal tzibur, which is when the bezdin made a hayra and the tzibur followed it. So we say if one of the tzibur died, you're still mechuyev to bring the param davashal tzibur. Echad mi bezdin, but if one of the bezdin died before the carbon was brought, peturin, then you no longer bring the param davar. Mantana. Who is the Tana that's saying this? Amr Chizda, Amr Reb Zera, Amr Reb Yimi, Amr Rav, Reb Meir. This is Reb Meir. The Amr Bezdin Mevi'in V'loy Tzibur. He says that the Bezdin is the one who brings the carbon. Helkach Meis Echad Minat Tzibur Chayavin. Even though one of the Tzibur died, you still bring it because that's irrelevant. They're not the ones who are bringing the carbon. The Kaim Kula Bezdin, because the Bezdin is still there. Meis Echad Mi Bezdin P'turin the Havel Chata Shemeis Echad Minat Shutvin. This is an in-between case. This is not a yochid that died where we say chata shemesa balaz lamisa, but neither is it a tzibur. It's a bezdin. A bezdin is a group of people, and they all have an involvement in it. So they're like a chata shemesa echad min hashutfin, which we're going to see that we're saying now that according to this man Amar, Reb Meir is saying that is not going to be. You can't bring a carbon chatas when it's a mesa echad min hashutfin, and therefore it's going to have to be lemisa. Mishum haki pturim. So it makes sense. It's talking about Rameir, and therefore, if one of the bezdin died, you can't bring it. Maskal Horayos and Nukmakur of Shimon Dama bezdin imat tzibur. Why can't it be Rav Shimon? Rav Shimon says that in addition to the tzibur bringing, bezdin also brings. Right? He said you bring 13, one for each of the shvatim, the tzibur of the shvatim, as well as the bezdin. Meis echad minat tzibur chayav and ein tzibur meisif. And it's irrelevant that one of the tzibur died, because even if one of the tzibur dies, it's still ein tzibur meis. So you could still bring the carbon chatas even if one of the tzibur is dead. Meis echad meis bezdin peturin. But one of the bezdin is pater. The kedarmin and the chatas shutvan. Why can't we say by Rav Shimon the same thing that we said in Rameir? That it's a chatas hashutvan, and therefore it's pater from bringing a carbon chatas. Abai says, he says there's a different. It's not because of our Gemara over here, because of the machlokes over here between Rav Shimon and Rav Meir that we say it has to be like Rav Meir. It's because of a different machlokes. They argue about what the disposition of the question is of chatas of a shutvin is. Rav Meir holds chatas of shutvin cannot be brought, but Rav Shimon says a chatas of a shutvin it doesn't have a din of chatas shemesa baleh, but rather it could still be brought. The Tanya, par v'sar shel Yom Kippurim. Again, the par and the sar of Yom Kippurim is brought for the tumas of the Kehanim and the Yisraelim she'avdu, and they had set aside this par v'sar, and then it got lost. V'hevesh acherim tachteim, and they got others in its place. Yomusu kulam, and then they found the original ones. The din is, and they brought these other ones. Now you found the original. Yamusukun. They all have to die. All the karbanis, all the animals were killed. Divir Rabbi Yehuda. That was Rabbi Yehuda because he says chata shemesu bala or chapa sheniskaper bala. But Lazar Shimon Aimer Euro doesn't have to be killed. Doesn't have a din of chata shemesu bala. But rather, you should wait for it to get a mum, and then you could sell it. They say it has a din like a chatas tzibur, and a tzibur is not mace. So he says, shutfin, this is a shutfis. This carbon is brought as a shutfis between the kohen gadol and the tzibur. So it has a din that there's different component parts of it, and that is a din like a shutf. And a shutfis also has a din of ein chatas tzibur mesa. So you see a raya that Rav Shimon holds that a chatas of a shutuf does not have the din of a tzib of a yachid that it's not brought, which has the din of chatas tzibur mesa. Amalei Rav Yosef kahanim ka'amrit. You're trying to say that it could even be Rav Shimon, and it can't be Rav Shimon because he holds that it's a shutvis and it therefore has a din of ein tzibur mesa. Shani kahanim de'ikru kal. Kahanim, the case over there is talking about the kahanim. They are the shutvis in it. Kahanim themselves are a kahal. You want to say that it's a shutvis between the kahanim and the that they all have investment in this carbon, but kahanim themselves are a tzibur. They're not a shutvis. The carbon that's brought as the part of Yom Kippurim, which is brought by the Kehanim, they themselves are a tzibur. They're not a din of a shuttis. It's going to be mechaper on the Kayanim. Al kol amakal. So we call the Kehanim makal. If you're saying the Kehanim have a din of a kahal as a tzibur and not as a shuttis, why don't we bring a separate par? We said we bring, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we bring, and Rabbi Shimon as well. If the Gans Kal Yisrael was Ovid did an avera because of the hayra of the bezin, we said we bring 12 karbanis. Why don't we bring 13? We're calling kahanim a separate kahal. They should have their own din of a tzibur, and they should have to bring a 13th carbon paralim davar. And if we say in a chanami, we do bring tavilu shvatim, then we have 13 rather than 12. The Shevet Levi is not called a kahal. The whole Levi is not called a kahal. Being called a tzibur, being called a kahal, has to do with nachla, with getting a nachla. And since the Leviim were not given a nachla, they don't get the din of a kahal. And the kahanim are subsumed within Leviim, so they also don't have a din of kahal. So then if that's the case, now we're down to 11. We were saying we have Leviim and the kahanim separately. Now we're saying you don't have either Leviim or kahanim, so then it should be 11. Amar Abaye, Ephraim, Menashe, Reuben, Shimon, Yuli. Ephraim and Menashe was split into 2, so that's how you get to 12. We darshan that the pasuk says that about Ephraim and Menashe that they should be called like their brothers. L'gabei nachla, they get a full share, but only for that, not for anything else. They had a separate when the Torah describes how the Yidden traveled in the Midbar. It says that they had their own flag and their own machna. So the din of the Degalim, the camping, the way they had separate camps follows the Nachla. That depends on Nachla. In order that it shouldn't be that they should be left out from the Degalim. They had their own Nasi. So we don't want that some of the Nasiim were counted and some Nasiim weren't. The Tanya Shlomo also Zayin Yemei Chanukah. Shlomo made 7 days of Chanukah when he was mechanech the Beis Hamikdash. But why did Moshe? This is not talking about the Chanukah in Kislev. This is talking about the Chanukah Sabayis. Why did Moshe make 12 days of Chanukah of Chinuch That every day there should be a different nasi, and no nasi should be left out. So we see that we have to be very careful about the feelings of the nasiim. My haviyah. So the Gemara goes back. What's taka the din of our original kasha? Toshma, the time of Shimon Omer. Chamish chatoyis meses. Vlad chatas. We're going to list the 5 chatoyis meses. Of Vlad chatas is a child of a chatas. Tumuras chatas, a tumura, a replacement of a chatas. Chatas shemesa baleh. Chatas that the bailam died. Chatas shekapu baleh. Chatas that the bailam were already in his kapper. Similarly, separately, a chatas she'avru shenasa. That is the one I forgot before. A chatas can only be brought from a behemoth that's less than a year old. If you separated a behemoth and then it became more than a year old, so the din is you have to kill him. It's not possible to talk about a vlad chatas by tzibur. She'ein tzibur mafrishin nekeva. We bring a paralam davar shel tzibur. We bring a soyer. These chatoyis are all zecharim, so there's no such thing as a vlad of tzibur. There's no one able. You can't make a tzibur. You can't exchange a carbon tzibur because there's no tzibur. There's no din tmuris on tzibur. And you also can't say because tzibur is not mason. But we don't know what's the din of sheniskapa b'lev she'avar shenasa. Yachol yamu. So maybe you should be mason. Amrit yom b'tzasam and number 4. Shema matzinu b'vlat chatas mur chatas shemesa b'lev b'yachid. Since we find by vlad chatas by the first 3 things that it's only by yachid, there's only by a yachid v'loy b'tzibur, but it doesn't apply to tzibur. Af sheniskapa b'lev she'avar shenasa. Similarly, sheniskapa b'lev she'avar shenasa b'yachid v'loy b'tzibur. In fact, the Marvich done after Mishiyevsha. How could you learn out from the case of the? You say because it's only by a yachid, these 3 things. So the other 2 things are also only by a yachid. But those 3 things, the reason why it's only by a yachid is not because it's a halacha that we learned from a pasuk. It's because it's just not able to be found. You don't have the opportunity. So how could you learn it out? So the Gemara of Shimon b'chad bakim gomer. Rav Shimon, who we're talking about, we're asking what do he hold by his shutvim. He'll say that that's part of what the halacha l'moshe misinai is, that it has to be that it can be brought. It has to be all 5 of these things have to apply in order for it to have the din of chata shemesa b'aleah. And since only 2 of them can apply by a tzibur, that's how we knew it doesn't apply to chata tzibur. It's a little strange. We're not really talking about shutfin anymore. Now we're going back to the original din of whether Rav Shimon holds chatas shemesa b'aleah applies b'tzibur, and we seem to have resolved it earlier, but the Gemara nevertheless seems to be being done it again. Okay, stop over here. We'll start the next parak tomorrow.
You have a great day.
Have a great day.